All right, guys, I wanted to talk a little bit about if you're interested in cutting the top off your 55, 56, 57 Chevy four-door to make it into a convertible, which if it doesn't have a top, it's most guys consider it a roadster. So basically, I'm just trying to tell you this because I've noticed there's lots of interest in people trying to build a convertible look-alike Tri-5 Chevy from a four-door. There's been a couple done recently on YouTube, and I had a comment on my channel recently that I should turn this into a roadster like the other guy on YouTube did. So I thought I'd run you guys through this about cutting the top off a four-door 55, 6, or 7 Chevy. There's some things you need to know if you're planning on doing this, and I'm not going to say I'm the world's leading expert on doing this, but I've built two of them. So I'm going to run you through that. I actually only have photographs of one of them that I built. I don't have anything from the second one. So I'm basically going to run you through some things that you may not know that will save you a huge mess. First things first, if you're planning on cutting the top off, say a 55 Chevy four-door sedan, not a four-door hardtop, they didn't come out with those till 56. If you're planning on cutting the top off of one of these, you need to do your chassis first. That is the biggest, most important thing you need to do. You don't build a car with door gaps and everything and then change the chassis, because more than likely when you bolt it down to that chassis, it's not going to line up the same. So the chassis you are going to use, you need to have under that car. Because when you cut the top off of one of these cars and you're going to put two-door doors on it, because two-door doors are longer than four-door. So you're going to have to move the B-pillar back. When you remove this from the car, you bolt your door on, you pretty much are making your door gaps. So if you've done this on a different chassis and then bolted down to a different one later, your gaps are going to be off. So what I'm trying to do is save you guys a big mess. So the biggest thing you need to know that some people may not even know is you need a cross member in the chassis for body support. From the factory, these cars had big X braces in the center of the chassis for structure, for strength, rigidity. Without that, these cars will basically fold up. They won't fold completely in half where the rocker's touching the ground, but they will do this. So keep that in mind. And they will get worse and worse and worse over time. You may not realize it, but your front support of your body is in your roof to your rear. This is what holds the car square. When you cut the top off and there's nothing here, this car will sag a little bit and the top of your door will touch your door jamb right here, your quarter panel. Now over time, as you keep driving the car and you're driving up and down the roads, hitting bumps, going over bridges, whatever, that car is going to keep stressing and it's going to get lower and lower in the center till eventually your door is going to be hard as hell to even open or shut. So you need a cross member in that chassis. That is the most important thing. I've built one right here. I've built 3 of these on Tri-5 Chevys, and I can tell you it is an eye-opener if you've never done it. Now you can buy a bolt-in kit, you can buy a complete aftermarket chassis that already has that in there, or you can fab your own from scratch like I did. I did 2x4. I call square stuff tubing. I call round stuff pipe. I don't know what the actual term is. You professionals will know, but I call rectangular square tubing tubing. Now I was trying to see if I had a scrap here. I do not, I don't think. I used 2x4 sized square tubing, and it had just a little bit thicker wall thickness than the factory frame rails. So that is what I use for my center. Now I don't have any measurements wrote down anywhere, so I can't help you with that if you're planning on building that. I'm still looking for that 2x4 tubing. But keep in mind, you need to put your drive shaft in there. You got to have your drive shaft in there, clearance for that. And you will also have to build them, those little crossover pieces down through there. Now, here's one thing, if you're going to build that, you do need to keep this in mind. When you're building that into your chassis, your little crossover drive shaft half loops is what I call them, you need to jack the car up in the back or the frame, jack the frame up until the rear end with the leaf springs completely unloads. That way all the weight is down, and put your drive shaft into your transmission, put all that in. That way you know the clearance off the bottom of that rear loop in that frame to your drive shaft. Because you don't want to just throw half loops in there to connect the two pieces together and then go over a bridge at 65 miles an hour where the car gets light and the suspension comes down and your drive shaft hits that loop. So make sure you have clearance off of that. But it's not that hard to do when you get in there and just try to figure it out. It's really not that tough to do. But I'm good. I've got pictures here, some build pictures of the very first one I did, and I can show you some of that stuff. But I will tell you, in most people's eyes, when you cut the top off a car, you have just destroyed a car. That's the way most people are. That's the way they think. Regardless of whether you finish the car and you're driving up and down the road in it, they still think you ruined a car. Well, the thing about it is, it's not their car, it's your car, and you can do whatever you want with it. And I'll tell you this, for me, not being a rich guy, I will never have the money to own a 55 Chevy convertible. So I had to build my own. That was just budget way to go. So I'm going to show you that in them pictures. Now, the thing that I really need to drill into your head that you really need to understand is that chassis needs to have that cross member in it for structure, for strength, rigidity. That needs to be in that chassis first before you do any of removing the top of the car. So you can buy, I don't know if they reproduce that X cross member like in the Tri-5 catalogs. You could go that way. It is very simple to build on your own, I can tell you. Or you can buy a bolt-in kit or whatever. When you put a jack underneath a car with one of those braces in it, it will lift up. If you put that jack, say, up here, or right in front of the rear tire or whatever, or even in the back, it will lift off this tire with it. It'll lift up the whole side of the car, whether the jack's up here or back there. You can't do that on a factory chassis without any center support in it. You can lift that wheel a foot off the ground and all three of the other tires will still be touching. You can do it back there or up here. That is how much those things actually work. I can put a jack in this frame right here and jack it up, and when that wheel comes about 2 or 3 inches off the ground, that one's off the ground as well. So that they do work. These frames on these cars are pretty weak link. They are very, very soft. There's nothing in the center. They're open. So if you're going to cut the top off, you need that structure, because if you don't have it, that car is just going to sit there and flex up and down, driving it down the road, and eventually it's just going to sag and sag and sag. Now, what I would recommend is build that center in that chassis first, or buy one and put it in. Get that chassis center all finished up. Use urethane brand new body mount set. Don't use rubber. Rubber's squishy. They are cheaper, but they're squishier. You don't want this stuff moving around. If you want to keep your nice tight door gaps and shiny paint and no chips, use urethane. I know there's some older guys. I've got a buddy of mine that swears that if you put urethane body mounts on a car, they squeak. And I can tell you it's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard, because I've done probably 6 G-bodies since the 90s and probably about 15 Tri-5 Chevys. I have never had a body mount squeak. What I think somebody done to get a squeak out of a body mount is they probably used a hardware store bolt that had a long shoulder on it, and when they tightened it down, the shoulder hit the threads in the body and it didn't tighten down all the way. So the body was allowing a squeak. Just my version, I don't care. I'm just telling you, from me building 2 Roadsters, I'm going to give my thoughts. I would use a urethane body mount, bolt that body down to that chassis, all of it, and then cut your top off. And I'm going to tell you something that's going to surprise you. You don't even need to worry about welding in braces to the body. You don't need to put tubing in here and structure all the car up. You don't even need to do that to cut the top off, because I can tell you this, when it's bolted to the chassis, that's pretty much where it's going to be. Because in the event that you have all this bracing built in this body and then you cut the top off, then you go in here and you bolt your 2-door doors on, which are longer, and you move your B-pillar back or buy a new B-pillar piece and put in there, and then you skin your rear door skin off, take the skin off the door and then cut the front down so it'll fit, and then you weld all that in, and then when you take all the bracing loose, that thing may move a little bit. So if you don't have any support in it, and it's bolted down to the chassis, and then you build your body mounts, that's where the car is relaxed. That's where the car wants to be. So keep that in mind. You can brace it up if you want. I'm just trying to tell you, it may change your door gaps. If you leave that top on the whole time that you take the body off to build the chassis or do the chassis work, and then cut the top off after it's bolted down, you're not going to have a headache of a car losing its structure or folding up on you, especially if it's rusty. You know, leave that top on there so you'll have a car in one piece to put back on. Then cut the top off of it. Now, there's a couple of differences in sedans than hardtops. To me, the more hardtop stuff you use, the more realistic it looks like a real 55, 6 or 7 convertible, because there is a difference in body design. On a hardtop, which is pretty much the same as a convertible, there's no B-pillar here. And if you look at the quarter panel right here where it's going to come up and meet the door, this part is lower than this part. This is what I call the silhouette of the car. Now, a hardtop convertible door is narrower at the back than it is at the front. It tapers down to meet that. So on a sedan, you have a belt line here. This belt line is straight all the way across. It does have a little kick down in it below the belt, but that belt line is straight all the way across the car, and it's just straight. This car has a silhouette to it that is tapered down. So if you want it to look like a real convertible, you need to put hardtop doors on it, either used or new ones. Now, what I did on my second Roadster that I built, I used these jam sections from Danchuck. You can buy just this section of the jam, and it has like a little flange here. It's like, I don't know, 3/8 long or something that you connect your door skin to, or a quarter panel if you wanted to. But you can buy just that jam section. Hardtop and convertible jam sections are different than a sedan. Now, a 4-door is definitely different from a 2-door sedan, but a 2-door sedan door will not work on a hardtop door. So you will have to purchase these out of one of the parts houses. Now, what I did on the second one was I bought those from Danchuck. Now, there is a rear inner piece that you're supposed to put in there and put to it, but I didn't do it. I was going to build different structures out of tubing in there on the back side and reinforce it that way. So that is what I did. Now, there's in this, I'm getting ready to show you on the pictures of this first one. I have build thread pictures of this showing it in order how it goes. You're going to see where it looks pretty much like a convertible. Now, what I did on this first car, I moved the B-pillar back. Now, when you remove the B-pillar off one of these sedans, you drill the spot welds out of this. There's going to be an open spot right there in the body. So you're going to have to build a fill plate in there and weld that all up and then grind it. Then you can move your B-pillar back. And of course, you'll have to cut the top off right here. What I did was I bought hardtop doors and put them on, and then I bought them jam sections, and then I figured out my gap, and then I welded that piece in. Then I took pieces of square tubing and welded it from the jam up to the back of that jam, so that was nice and structured from here to here, so this wouldn't fold forward or backward. But anyway, I'll get to this. I'm going to show you this. I'm just trying to give you guys a few tips of stuff you need to do. But I can tell you, first thing, the chassis is the very first thing you need to do. You don't want to build the whole car on a different chassis and then put it on another one, because it's not going to fit right. If you want a good quality built car that keeps a good gap, you need to do it with the body on the chassis and then build your posts and all the stuff in and door gaps. So 10/29 of 2008 was when I built my first 55 Roadster, and that was this car right here. I think I paid, it's been a long time ago, I want to say I paid like $500 for this car. This had a title, it had no engine and no transmission. Pretty rough car, had a little bit of rust here and there. Now, I had watched an episode of Overhauling, and they took a 56 4-door Bel Air and cut the top off of it and made it into a Roadster, and that's where I got the idea from. People have been doing this for years, so I'm not the world's leading expert on this by any means. But here it is with the top cut off, and I do have braces in here. And this is what I found out on this car, that when I braced that and then cut the top off of it and then built everything, when I cut those loose, it changed my door gap just a little bit. I want to say it was like 3/16 of an inch or something. So it changed it a little bit. So that's why I would not recommend bracing that body once you have it bolted down to the chassis you're going to use. But before I cut that top off, I did my chassis first. Now here is a factory 55 chassis. There is nothing in the center. It has a cross bar in the back and your cradle at the front. There's nothing here. So you can twist that frame like this. That's why when you jack up the rear back here, that frame will actually flex. I can tell you, if you got a two-door hardtop or something, you know, out in your driveway, and you go out and jack up take the wheel off of it at one corner, whether it be the rear or the front, don't try to open your door, because you're probably going to chunk your paint, because that body will be out of proportion. But if you have an aftermarket chassis, or you build an X-center or buy an X-center and put it in, that will alleviate that. So this is the chassis after I removed the power glide mounts and cleaned it up just a little bit. Here it is after that is all put in. Now these, I call them half loops. These little half loops are basically just a connector for these side pieces. These taper. They're thicker at the front than the back, because as I stated earlier, when you jack up the rear of the car and the rear end and leaf springs unfold as far as they go, you're going to have more clearance back here off your drive shaft. So you need the engine trans, you know, and the rear end and stuff in it in your drive shaft before you build that center. So anyway, I made these out of 4 separate pieces of plate. I want to say it was 3/16 plate. Now I cut them all out. I 45-degree ground all the edges, and then I welded it together. You professionals know this. When you're building something like that and you're welding all them sides, you want to have that weld in there. If you just weld it up, you know, straight cut, by the time you ground and clean that up, you're not going to have any weld on that, and it's going to crack. So if you 45-degree your edge and that's all fully welded, when you go back in there and grind it, it's still going to hold. I built my own transmission cross member, and you can see where I did exhaust passages. I hole sawed this rear long piece. I can tell you this is how I did it. I'm kind of remembering it as I go. This is the very first piece I put in, and it was one solid piece all the way across. I did one piece of 2x4 all the way across. Then I went in and built these and connected it, and then I went back and cut the center out. That way that piece stays pretty straight. That's like holding it in place where it needs to be as straight. The other thing you're going to need doing this, not only do you need a brand new set of urethane body mounts, you need your mufflers, whatever mufflers you're going to use, because there's all kinds of mufflers on the market, long, short, whatever. But you're going to need to know where your inlets and outlets are. I would highly recommend having your engine and trans mocked up in the car and have the headers you're going to use. That way you'll know if you need a center inlet muffler or an offset inlet muffler. Also, offset outlet or center outlet. That pretty much dictates where your holes are going to be. So you need your mufflers at least put up in there where you're going to put them, where you want them. I basically took a muffler and kind of set it up in there. I wanted to put it back here in that rear pocket area, and then I'm just drew a magic marker because I knew that's where it needed to be. I hole sawed the rear one, and then I found some round pipe that was kind of thick walled, and I slid it in there and welded it all up. So at the front, you can't really hole saw that. You have to have an oval hole for a piece of pipe to go in at an angle. So I cut that pipe the angle that it needed to be, and then I placed it up there to that flat side, and I traced around it with a magic marker. Then I used a plasma cutter, and I cut that oval hole out on both sides. Then I slid the pipe in there, and then I welded it up. So anyway, built that. Then I put new urethane body mounts on, and then I put the body down and bolted it all down. At that point, the car's where it needs to be, and you can make your body mount or your door gaps the way you need them. Now, on to the windshield post right here. So when you cut the top off, you're going to have an open hole up here. Now, what I did on mine, the sedan, the first one right here, I cut it right off of this. Actually, I think I come up here to where this was even. I cut it right there, and I used a piece of square steel tubing in here as a filler, and I welded it up. So I went from like right here over. So I cut straight across there, keeping the same width on that windshield frame across there. Now on the bottom, when you get under here, you've got this under brace down here. I cut it wider. That way when I plated that in, it had an angled plate. Instead of just being straight cut and looking like it was chopped off, I did it at an angle so it looked a little bit better. Just me, just personal preference. But that's what I did on this car. Now I took sheet metal, and I basically held sheet metal up there on these little corner pieces up here, because this is open back up in here. I took sheet metal up there, little pieces, and I traced them out and then cut them out with a cutoff wheel, and then I butt welded them up there. Now on my center right here, I had a piece of, I don't even remember, it was a piece of strap, steel strap, but it was the exact width I needed for that. It was a long straight piece. Now of course it's straight and this is curved. So I cut a bunch of relief cuts in it. I didn't cut them all the way through. I cut it almost through. And that way you can kind of bend it and fold it the way you needed. And then I just went into tack welding, tack and tack and tack, and then I welded up my cuts and then ground everything. But that's how I got that fit like that. So that is pretty much me getting this side going on that. Now right here, you can see how open the windshield post is right there, and this is where I stopped the plating process trying to finish up this side. I could not locate a set of front two-door sedan doors, so what I did was I had a guy downtown that had a whole bunch of four-door parts. Some of them, the bottoms of the doors were pretty rusty. I bought an extra set of front four-door doors. So I went to a buddy's house and I measured his two-door sedan from end to end, because two-door doors are longer than four-door doors. So I added whatever width that was, I do not remember now. I want to say it was like 10, 11, 12 inches or something. Added that to the back of that door and fully welded it up. So now I had two-door length doors. Now the reason you want to make sure your doors are pretty much an accurate measurement is so you can use an actual two-door stainless steel trim down the side of the car and line up and fit the car right. I was putting the molding back on the car. You can weld your holes up and not put any on if you want. Now, I was on a strict budget here, so I had to, save money where I could. So what I did was I welded up my door handle holes and my door lock hole and just made it smooth like it was shaved door handles, because you could really lean right over the edge of the door and pull up on the door handle and open the door. So it basically was like a shaved door handle. But this right here is after I moved the B-pillar back and I welded it all in, and then I put my square tubing in the back here in the jamb to hold strength up here to here so this didn't flex on me. I took the door skin and cut it loose from the door, and then I cut the front of the door down until it fit in that gap, and then I welded it up. Now something you need to realize, when you weld a door skin in these cars like this, you're going to match up your top here and here. You're going to have a gap at the bottom like that wide, because originally this is a door, so there's a door gap. So you have to plate in that as well. I think I sheet metaled it, I don't really remember. But this is a two-door molding door on the car with my original four-door paint divider here. But the door opened and closed very nice. Now on a Roadster without a top, you don't need weather stripping. So I was going to weld up every one of the holes where the weather stripping clips in. And you don't need windlace, so I wasn't going to have any of that stuff. But the door opened and shut very, very nice. I was so proud of that. Then, this is it after I ground the welds and then I stripped it down to bare metal on this side. And it fit up so nice, you can't even hardly tell that that was not a two-door sedan door, or quarter panel to start off with. But here's a better shot of the windshield frame after I put my relief cuts in to get it to go in there. But if I'd have had a long piece of sheet metal, I would have laid it up there and then just traced it out and then cut it out with a cutoff wheel. But I was on a budget and I was trying to use what I had here to save money. So I've got a couple of pictures missing. Now here is one of the doors upside down on sawhorses. You can see where I added to it. I welded all that. Now I was going to later I was going to cut this center piece out, and I was going to cut a piece of sheet metal and put over that and then screw it on there. That is actually a screw-on panel that would go on there from the factory so you can get your door window regulators in there. I didn't have windows in this car, so I was just going to weld it up solid. Now, this is the garnish molding on the door. I actually built caps on the end and I welded it in there solid. Now there is a gap underneath there. So that way when I did upholstered door panels, they would tuck up under there and then I could attach them to the door. So it would have looked finished and be correct. I had to take two 4-door garnish moldings and cut them all to pieces and then add that section for that longer door. So there's a lot of cutting and welding you got to do, man. This is after Bodywork, and this is my Z-Chrome primer. I love Z-Chrome. It's what I've used since the 90s. But that is it in Z-Chrome primer. It turned out awesome. This is where it really gets awesome. That is it after finishing it up, the Z-Chrome and blocking everything out and finishing the putty and everything. That is black 2K urethane primer, and at the time that was 75 bucks for a gallon with the activator. It's Autobahn brand was what it was, but it has a nice little satiny sheen to it. And you know, I'm on a budget, so I'm trying to pinch pennies as much as I can. I think my budget was 2,500 bucks, and I did it. So now, with that said, the car wasn't done. This was just to take it on a cruise that my local car club was putting on. I wanted to build the car pretty much all together, unfinished, and then I was going to take it back apart and finish out, you know, paint the chassis and paint the body and make it really nice. I just ended up selling it. Somebody fell in love with it on that cruise, and I sold it. So I ended up buying a two-door post body after this. But this picture, it looks really nice. I've got all the bodywork done in the A-pillar, or the windshield post. It turned out awesome. These wheels I got off Craigslist for like 500 bucks. These are 18-inch, had pretty new tires on them. The wheels were new too. They were off like a third generation F-body. They were 18 by 8, I think, but they were all four same size. But I used them. I used lowering blocks in the back, and I cut the coil in the front. But it's just my budget way of getting it going. Now here's where it really got kind of crazy. When you do an interior on a car, interiors are expensive. What I did was I measured what the width of the back of the car was, end to end or side to side, and I went to my local LKQ salvage and I found a seat that was the perfect width in there. These seats are out of a, I want to say like a 2000 something, early 2000 something Chrysler Concorde. They were Chrysler's bigger four-door cars at the time, front-wheel drive. That seat fit perfectly in there. Well, the width did. I had to build brackets and stuff to make the seat back bolt in, and I had to build my own stuff for the bottom. It has a nice fold-down armrest with two cup holders in it. That was really kind of cool. Now the front seats are from the same car. These seats were mint. They didn't have any stains. They weren't dirty. The car was crashed in the front, so whoever's car that was, they had a nice car. But I removed the headrests. I don't like headrests on convertibles, and I don't like them on any 55 Chevy, to be honest with you. They just, to me, they look out of place, but it's just me. My personal opinion, everybody's different. I removed them. Now there's little plastic, you know, covers here where the bars go in there for the headrest. I removed those. Now I took the headrest and I had some strap steel that was like, I don't know, 1.5 wide, and I cut it to where it was like 5 inches long, and I lightly rounded all four corners. I took the material off the headrest and I laid that headrest up there, the two bars that come down that go in that seat, and I set them up there on that piece of strap and I welded around it. At that point, I cut those bars for the headrest and I turned them upside down and slipped them right back into the seat, and it was basically a flat piece of plate that fit down in there. And I used the material from the headrest, I cut it, and I spray glued it to that piece of strap and folded it underneath and then pushed it down in there, and it actually looked like part of the seat had never had a headrest on it. So it was a nice little trick way of going. Now the reason to do this, if you're on a mega low budget like I was, I paid $60 or $65 for the front and rear seats from my local pull-apart salvage. At that point, I went to American Upholstery in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's a huge upholstery supply. They can get you the original material from Detroit. I paid almost $200 for 2 yards of the matching gray velour material. So when I made my door panels myself, the material would match. So when you think about it, 260 bucks in door panels and seats. I mean, of course I'd had to buy, you know, the paneling and stuff and the foam, but that was just a budget way to go for upholstery. I'd bought a one-piece molded carpet set from ACC to put in the car. And that was the other thing about this seat bottom. This seat is out of a front-wheel drive car. They don't have a transmission tunnel, so this seat is actually setting on top of the tranny tunnel right there, and you could be able to stick your hand underneath both sides of the seat. There's nothing there. So I took plywood and I basically cut out pieces that fit in there to take up that gap, and I welded L brackets to the floor. And the one-piece molded carpet set, when I put it in the car, you always trim off the side edges right here. That's always wider, so I cut it off. I used those cut-offs and spray glued it to that plywood. So it was the perfect filler piece to take up that gap. So budget interior for a Roadster right there. Then right here, this is the top boot, what I call a top boot. These cars, these real convertibles, they had, you know, vinyl with little snaps covers that when the top's down, you put that boot on and you snap it down. This is kind of what they look like when they're on. This is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood that I cut. I kind of dug a hole into the plywood in places and I put carriage bolts down in there. And then what I did was I laid aluminum foil all over the back of the car back here, over the sides and everything of the car. Then I put the plywood on and got underneath the rear deck inside the car and I bolted it down. Then I took fiberglass mat and laid all over the whole car with resin, and I fiberglassed that a couple layers, and I let that mat hang down over the body so it's all kinds of jagged and looked like hell. After it dried, I went back and I drew it with a Sharpie where I wanted to cut it, and then I pulled it off of the car and I cut it with a cutoff wheel. At that point, this is raw fiberglass. I went in there and DA sanded it down a little bit to smooth it up. And I was planning on doing body filler on this and then blocking it out, priming it, and it was going to be painted with the car. I was going to paint it separately, but I wanted it to have the matching color on it. You could wrap that in leather, vinyl, whatever. You know, it could be upholstered if you wanted it to. I cut this out to fit exactly to the belt line where I'd cut it off back here, but it also contoured the seat very nice. So it just looked like it was made for the car, which in reality it was. But to get ready for that car cruise, I didn't have time to even start the bodywork process. I bolted that down and we took off on that cruise. 200 miles on a summer day, and I didn't have a lick of trouble out of that car. The only thing that happened was the speedometer started chirping and the needle was bouncing, so I reached under there and undid the cable from the back of the speedometer and finished out the cruise. I never painted under the hood of the car. The inner fenders were surface rusted. The engine was greasy. It was an old used 305 I pulled out of a Malibu and put in there. I put a 700 R4 transmission in it. But in this picture, I mean, it looks pretty decent. You know what I mean? It doesn't look too bad. I was planning on finishing the car. I just didn't do it. I sold it in exactly that condition. The guy came like a day or two later and paid for this, and his son took off in it. They got on the turnpike and drove to Kansas City from here in Oklahoma in that car. And he didn't have any trouble. He just got a bad sunburn, he said. But the car ran good, it drove good, it was actually pretty nice. It rode a little rough because I cut the coils on it, but I think I cut 2 coils out of that. The more coils you cut out, the rougher they ride. 1 is not too bad, but when you cut 2 out, it gets pretty bad. But I think the car turned out pretty nice. Of course, it wasn't finished. I didn't have any bumpers on it, but I was planning on painting it. You can see in this picture, I painted the dash blue pearl. That's the whole color the car was going to be, was that blue pearl. But that's us driving down the road. A guy sitting in Adair, Oklahoma, took this picture. He was meeting up with us there on this cruise. But that's it, going down the road. And then this one's going down the road, and that one. A buddy of mine took this picture out of the window of his Model T, got up to us. This is his first one, though. He was pulling up on us right here. And then this is him when he got up beside us. But the car, you know, resembled a real convertible. It really did in a way. But to me, the windshield is just too tall on it. That is pretty evident in one of the 2 of them pictures. It just, from this angle, that windshield post does not look too bad from the back angle. But when you look at it from the front, I never did like it. It looks top heavy. And if you do not know, you're getting ready to know. A sedan windshield does not interchange with a hardtop sport coupe. It is almost an inch, almost a full inch narrower on a hardtop than a sedan. And this would be the same as a convertible. That's why a convertible doesn't look top heavy on the windshield. This is another difference you'll see right away. If I get the GoPro down here pretty even, see how thin that roof is right here? Like where the top of the stainless trim would be. Look how tall that gets going up through there. So on my second Roadster I built, I used the windshield area right here from a 56 4-door hardtop so I could put a brand new hardtop windshield in it. So I had changed that out, so that got me my lower windshield post. So to me it looked more accurate. And then on the second Roadster I built, I don't have any photos or anything of it. I put a used set of hardtop 55 doors on it to have the correct look. I bought these jam pieces from Dan Chuck, and I welded those in once I had a gap I liked. I went to a local salvage that used to be down here. He had a pair of 56 4-door hardtop rear doors, which are identical to 2-door hardtop. They're just basically cut down into doors. And I skinned that door and, you know, welded it in. So I had my correct silhouette. Now, if you start out with a 6 or 7 Chevy 4-door hardtop, you're already in right there. If you do a sedan, you're going to have to do a lot more work. But what I ran into on the second Roadster was this belt line. So I had to cut this right here. And I ended up cutting pretty close to this. I think I left a little flange right here, and I cut it all the way because this kicks up right here. You don't want that. Convertibles, real convertibles, don't have rear decks because your convertible top goes down in there. But this was a Roadster. So what I did was I cut all of this stuff out. I had another deck lid that the whole bottom was rusty on, and I cut this top piece of the deck lid off because this has the exact contour I needed. And I cut it to where it fit up to this, and I butt welded that in there. So I had a wide panel here, because convertibles have a pretty wide panel here. You can see the difference in a sedan 55 to a hardtop 55. See the width? So this was what I was after, was a wider panel. So that's why I used part of a deck lid. Now, the other thing I ended up doing was when I started putting all this together, I had a big gap right here. There was a hole in the body right here. There was nothing. So I had a 4-door parts car here that I'd already cut pieces out of, and I cut this section of the top of the quarter off, like right here. And I put that in there. So I had a perfect body when I was done. Now, the other thing I did that was pretty damn neat, the garnish moldings that go on these cars, when you put your doors on, there's a garnish molding that goes on here that slips over your door panel top, and it contours the dash right here. So you've got this curve that is wide at the front, and it gets thinner as it goes back. Now, once it gets back here to this rear garnish molding, I use the 4-door hardtop rear garnish moldings, and I cut it down up here because it's way long. That is about, I'm going off memory, check it before you buy anything, if you're going to do it. That curve in that garnish molding that kicks around, I want to say is 1/2 inch, which I think that's what this is. So you can go to your local Home Depot or Lowe's and buy conduit. This is steel conduit, and it's, I think, 1/2 inch. Maybe 3/4, I don't remember. But I bought conduit, and I bought a conduit bender. It was like 18 bucks. It's hanging over there on the wall with that blue handle. And I basically took a piece of conduit, and I bent on it little at a time with that tubing bender, and then over my leg or whatever I could do, and I got it to contour from the back of that garnish molding. I butt welded it to the back of the garnish molding where I'd cut it off all the way around up to that sheet metal. So this being round and the sheet metal being flat, I'll show you what I did here. So I took that conduit and basically stuck it up there to where my deck lid piece, to where it was even. That leaves a pretty big open hole here because this is round going to flat, and I just filled that up with weld and then ground it. So when I was done, I had a rolled edge all the way around the back of the car that looked like a finish part. I actually had a guy come over here, and he thought that was a real 55 convertible stripped down for restoration, and that was a 4-door sedan that I turned into a Roadster. Now, I know this video is getting long, guys, but I am trying to throw out as many tips as I can to give you guys, because I know there's somebody out there who's probably going to do this, is planning on doing this, or has already started doing this, and I'm trying to help you out that I did that might help you out. Now, what I had planned on doing on that second Roadster was building a top that looked like a real 55 convertible top. The reason is, when I went on this 200-mile cruise, I had a boonie hat on, and I got to tell you, I got sunburned bad just for, you know, a half a day. I was burned bad. So for me, if I was going to go on a long trip like that, I wanted to put the roof on it, but I wanted it to look like a real convertible top. So here is my idea of what I was going to do. I had went to a show, car show, and a guy let me take my tailor's tape measure, and he let me get inside his car and measure where his crossbars were in his real 55 convertible. So I wrote everything down because I was going for accuracy, you know, as best I could. So I was going to build a frame out of aluminum tubing, but I wanted it to look accurate. At that point, I was going to do tubing across in the exact spacing that the factory 55s looked. That way when somebody, you know, even a Tri-5 guy, if he seen the car sitting in a parking lot, he would swear it was a real convertible. But I was going to build it all out of aluminum tubing. That way it's lightweight. I could pretty much probably take it off by myself. That was the idea behind it. Now, once I got the frame built out of aluminum, I have a lady, I don't have her, I'm just saying, in a town over from me is a lady that does upholstery work. And I called and talked to her. She does custom boat covers. And when she's done with these boat covers, they look like they fit the boat like a glove. Like she cuts them to where they fit the boat perfectly. So I called her, told her what I was wanting to do. She was going to build me a convertible top over that frame, like out of canvas or whatever she used. It's pretty much the same as a convertible top. She was even going to sew in the plastic back window. So it was going to look like the real deal. Now, I will tell you, I was going to, which I'd already started, I was going to not have any side glass in and just completely fill it like I did on this one. But if you wanted to, this was an idea I had. You could leave your wing window, your belt line stainless and all that and put brand new glass in it. I was going to use a 4-door hardtop rear quarter glass because they're way longer, and I was just going to cut part of the framing down and have new glass cut to where it's smaller and then put the frame back up to it. But it would have been a shorter 4-door hardtop rear glass. Now the reason is 4-door hardtop has a curve to it. A real convertible has a kind of a kick in it. It looks kind of odd to me. Now that's for the window to roll down or whatever. But my idea was to use roof rail seals reproductions from a 4-door hardtop up there on the roof. That way when you rolled your windows up, they would actually seal. So once you put your top on and rolled your windows up, it would be pretty much, well, water resistant, more water resistant than not having a top at all. Now I was going to go to a salvage and I was going to take off whatever I could find, 60s to 80s or 90s, some type of convertible car, Ford, Mopar, Chevy, whatever. I was going to try to find the latches and the dowels and all the locator pin stuff and cut it out of the windshield post and, you know, put it in mine and then have all that hardware and put it in that aluminum frame. That way the front would actually latch like a real convertible. And at that point I was going to use some rubber seal. There's all kinds of seals you can look at Steel Rubber Products. They have all kinds of stuff you can buy by the foot or the yard or something. So I was going to put a, you know, like a sponge seal across here where it would seal up. And then on the back here, I was going to do another sponge seal all the way across the bottom of that top when it set on there. Now to attach the top, I had two ideas. I was going to use bolts and then open the trunk and get underneath and put nuts under it. Or I thought about using muscle car hood pins in there and then open the trunk and put the pins in from underneath on the bottom of the deck. You know, like put a heavy little spring on there and then put the pin in it. But it's just something that could have been done. I always thought it would have been cool. Now here's another idea I thought about doing. It would be a lot of work, but for me, more time than money, it would have been awesome. I was going to get some muffler pipe, stainless steel from Summit. I was going to buy a straight stick, and then I was going to buy some mandrel bends. That way it doesn't have the kinks in it. And I was actually going to cut it all in half. That way you have a half circle of stainless steel. And I was going to make brackets to where it bolted to the windshield frame on the back side. You'd have a round curved stainless steel finishing cover. But I was going to cut it in pieces and pretty much weld it all together and then go back and grind it and polish it. So it looked like one solid stainless piece going all the way around the windshield, the back part back here. But I never did it. Now when you cut one like up here and you cut this way, you can't just put a mandrel bend up there. It's going to be wonky. So you'd have to put relief cuts in that stainless muffler pipe and finagle it and then weld it again and then polish it, you know, grind it and polish it. But it's something that could be done if you was really motivated to do. But I got to tell you, I learned quite a bit from the first car. And I never finished the second car. I did the whole back half of the body shell, like the quarters and all that, and did the conduit. I ended up getting this 2-door hardtop, which is my dream car, and I did not have the money to build both cars. I'd bought a new windshield for the second Roadster, which was for a hardtop. I'd bought some, I think, a new grill and some other stuff. So I just basically decided to stop on the Roadster and use all the parts on this, and that's actually the chassis under this car is from that Roadster. And I will tell you another tip if you're going to do a Roadster without a top. Another very key component to finishing out the car for less body flex. Hardtops and convertibles have 2 extra body mounts right here on the side of the chassis. See that little mount right there? They are different than these right here. Those are the same ones that's on the inside of the frame. There will be some you can remove if you had a spare chassis. That is the same part number. There's also a little brace welded spot welded to the bottom of the floorboard here that bolts to. So you'd need to put that brace on the bottom of the floorboards with that extra body mount. And here's the other difference. There is a brace right here. See that brace? It's like two pieces. It goes up to the side of the tranny tunnel there, and then there's one on the other side. So this is what GM did. There's a little angle piece right here. That's how they got their strength in the car without having a B-pillar here. So if you're going to cut the top off a car, if you don't want that thing folding up and flexing everywhere and cracking out your body filler, you need to make sure you put in the second body mounts with all the parts. You can buy every one of those braces and all those pieces right out of the catalogs. So it's just the way I would do it. If you have a lot of money, say you got a four-door body laying out in the yard and you don't have any money in it, I would recommend go ahead and buy 2 brand new quarter panels, like for a convertible or a hardtop, and put those on there and get you a couple of hardtop doors, either buy new or buy a couple of used ones, and you'd be money ahead right there. If you're dead set on a roadster is what I'm telling you. Now you got to keep in mind there's guys like me out there, we would love to have a convertible, we just can't afford it, man. So we have to do what we can. But I don't think I would ever go buy a $2,000 or $3,000 four-door car that, you know, it's a decent car and then cut it up. I would buy an old salvage yard stripped out Hulk is what I would do, which is what I did on both of them. So, but that's pretty much it, guys. It's a long video, but I try to put as much information in these videos as I can, because if somebody goes into that without knowing what they're doing, or watch some other person's video that done it, you know, you're going to encounter some problems. It can be done. It just depends on how motivated you are. But I can tell you, if you go in and cut the top off a car first and then you lose interest in it and years go by and the car's sitting out there with the top cut off of it, you're not going to get as much money out of that car if you decide to sell it with the top cut off of it. So I will tell you, don't throw away anything. Whatever you cut off that car, do not throw it away. Keep it until it's done, because there may be one little piece off of the roof or some little something that you can use throughout that car as you're scabbing it together. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I got to add this in on the video here. The second Roadster I was talking about building that looked a little bit more accurate to a convertible than my first one. My buddy that I give the car to, it's sitting out in his field, and I can show you here the conduit around the back with the garnish moldings that I was talking about. This is the driver's side of the car. You can see the garnish molding and how it's curved, that conduit curved around. Now, I never finished all the metal work on it. It looks like I got a little filler piece put in there, but I have a rolled edge for that garnish molding that goes all the way around the back of the car. See how much better that looks? But if you didn't have a top on it, that would look nice and finished with your upholstery going up underneath that, you know, the edge of that conduit. So I just wanted to show that.